In today's video, we're looking at the Munich Putsch, which happened in 1923. Here are our 3 essential questions. Remember, you should be able to answer all of these questions by the end of this video. The first, why did Hitler and the Nazis believe that 1923 was a good year to have a putsch? The second, what happened on November 8th and 9th of 1923? The third, what were the results of the putsch, including what happened during the trial in 1924? Before we move on, I'd like to remind or tell you that a putsch is a violent attempt to overthrow a government, kind of like a coup. Let's begin. We're starting in November 1923, and at this time the Nazis had about 3,000 members. That's not very many, and their support was mainly based in Bavaria, which, if you look at the map, is in the south of Germany. It's highlighted in red. So the party's support is localized in a small area in the south, and they do not have very many members. But even though they have so little support, they develop an audacious plan to try to take over the German government. But the main question is, why did they believe that 1923 was the right time for them to have a putsch? Well, there are 5 different reasons. The first, Hitler had been making friends with a famous World War I general named Erich von Ludendorff. And Hitler believed that with Ludendorff's help, the Nazis could win the support of the army, kind of like what happened during the German Revolution. Gaining the support of the army would allow the Nazis to walk into the German parliament without any military resistance, which is crucial for a smooth takeover of power. The second reason they thought 1923 was a good year was the Bavarian state government at the time was also right-wing, and they were also plotting to overthrow the German government. So, Hitler, as a result, thought that the Bavarian state government would help the Nazis gain power. The third reason was that Stresemann was beginning to crack down on extremist political parties, so the Nazis felt that they had to act before it was too late, before it was them who were being cracked down upon. The fourth, Hitler could sense that Stresemann's government was getting a handle on Germany's economic and political problems. Remember that in 1923, Stresemann's government is dealing with hyperinflation and the occupation of the Ruhr. And Hitler sees them fixing these problems, and he knows that he has to act before all of the unrest dies down and people are happy with the Weimar Republic. Always keep in mind that Nazi support grows when German citizens are unhappy with their elected government. If Stresemann fixes all of the problems causing unrest, Hitler would lose support. This is why he decided to act in 1923. And finally, in September of 1923, Stresemann calls off passive resistance in the Ruhr and begins to repay reparations to France. Many right-wing supporters hate this because they feel that this is the Weimar government again showing that it is weak, again conceding to the Allies' demands. So this kind of acts like a trigger for the putsch. You can see that some of the causes of the putsch are long-term, while others, like number 5, are short-term. In your notes, you should label or color-code the causes into long and short-term. Moving on. In November of 1923, there are 2 basic dates that you need to remember: November 8th and November 9th. On November 8th, there was a meeting of 3,000 businessmen at a beer hall called the Bürgerbraukeller in Munich. And there were 3 main speakers: von Kahr, who was the head of the Bavarian government, von Seisser, who was the head of the Bavarian police, and von Loslow, who was the head of the army in Bavaria. It is quite clear from their job descriptions that these men were quite important speakers who held a lot of influence in Bavaria. Hitler burst into this meeting with 600 brown shirts waving guns in the air. A few shots were fired, and Hitler announced that he was taking over the Bavarian government, and that after this takeover, he would then march on the German government in Berlin itself. Next, he took Kahr, Seisser, and Loslow into a small side room away from the businessmen, and he spoke to them, trying to convince them to support his putsch. After about an hour, the four men came out of the room after they agreed to support the plan. The next day, on November 9th, the plan was to meet and march on the Bavarian government offices. Laszlo would ensure the army would not interfere, Seisser would ensure that the police would not interfere, and Kahr would help smooth the transition in government. However, Seisser, Laszlo, and Kahr changed their minds. But even though the Nazi Party only had about 2,000 rifles, which was a lot less than the local police and army had, Hitler decided to continue with the putsch. He'd gone so far, and he had to keep going. He sent 3,000 Nazis, supported by the SA, to take over key buildings in Munich. Meanwhile, Hitler and his shock troop marched on to the town center to declare Hitler president of Germany. However, Hitler doesn't get that far. State police stopped him and his supporters on a street called the Residenzstrasse. There was an exchange of fire, and in this scuffle, Hitler's bodyguard protects him, pulling him down to the ground with such force that Hitler's shoulder was dislocated and the bodyguard was shot. About 16 Nazis and 4 police were killed, although the numbers here are iffy because different books say different things. Hitler himself escapes to hide in a friend's house. However, he is found and arrested 2 days later when the family's gardener informs the police, and Hitler is found hiding in a wardrobe. Basically, the Munich Putsch formally ends with Hitler's trial, which occurs in February of 1924. I should mention that this is not just Hitler's trial. It is in fact the trial of all the leaders of the Putsch. So we have Hitler being put on trial, Ludendorff being put on trial, and Röhm being put on trial, among a few others. They are all found guilty of treason, so they're guilty of crimes against the state, of trying to overthrow the government. However, the judge is quite lenient. Ludendorff was not given any sentence. Röhm was only given 15 months, but was released immediately, and Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in jail at Landsberg Castle. 5 years was the minimum sentence for treason. However, Hitler only ends up serving 9 months. And Landsberg Castle is a very beautiful castle. Hitler is said to have had his own room and was allowed to have as many visitors as he wanted. And he took this time in prison to write his autobiography, Mein Kampf, which translates in English as My Struggle. Hitler used the trial to gain national publicity for the views of the Nazi Party, and he became a national figure. The newspapers of the time reported what Hitler said at the trial, and Hitler uses that publicity to spread Nazi Party policy and gain support throughout Germany. Again, as I have said before, Hitler wrote his autobiography Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, during his prison stay. And this book contains his political ideas. It basically became sort of like the Nazis' go-to manual. It was a very important text for the Nazi Party, outlining their political ideas and what they stood for. Hitler also realized the need for a new approach to taking over power. He said, "Instead of an armed coup, we shall have to hold our noses and enter the Reichstag. If outvoting them takes longer than outshooting them, at least the result will be guaranteed. Sooner or later, we shall have a majority, and after that, Germany." This quote shows us that Hitler realized that taking the government by force was not going to work. The Nazis were going to have to take over the power through democratic means, and then get rid of democracy in Germany. The NSDAP, the Nazi Party, was then banned. However, this ban was weakly enforced and then lifted in 1925. In fact, even though the party was illegal, the publicity from the trial allowed the Nazi Party to gain 32 seats in the Reichstag. These were their first ever seats in the Reichstag in 1924. And this was before the ban was even lifted, when the party was still illegal. You might wonder how people could vote for a party that was illegal. But to get around this, people voted for the Nazi Party under a different name. It was under the name of the National Socialist Freedom Movement, but essentially it was still the Nazi Party. So that is the Munich Putsch. It's quite an important event because of how it changed the Nazi approach to the takeover of power in Germany. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.